In this lesson, we will import in the rig we will repurpose. This scene is Female Hero Game in your project files. So we have this really neat character Justin has made for us, and he's put through Topogun in order for the mesh to be workable for control rig and animation purposes. We have a course on that if you're interested, but let's say we go ahead and stay focused on our objective. So we don't always want to constantly build a control rig from scratch. Instead, we'd want to use some type of script, or even if we have a control that, let's say, matches the proportions of a new character, well, we can possibly just use that rig instead to save us a ton of time. Now, with that said, even though we are going to reuse a control rig, we still have some assets that we'll need to adhere to. As far as the character's belt strap, we'll need to make sure that that has a workable rig that would be ready for game. So we'll learn how to rig a belt. It's going to be pretty neat. We also have the character's hair to worry about. And those are just a few things that we'll need to make sure to add new controls for in order for this to be ready for animation. So with that said, let's say we get started by importing in the rig we'll work with. I'll choose File, Import. Taking a look at the options over to our right, we're going to leave them the same, and we will leave on use namespaces. I'll show you a way to remove namespaces using Mel. But let's say we go ahead and choose our biker and import that into our scene. Okay, so here we have it, our biker rig. If you'd like to learn more about building this control rig from scratch, we have a course dedicated to it, rigging game characters in Maya. You may notice that its texture has changed simply because we've actually used this asset in another project, a Unity project, which is also really neat, and you'll learn more about that. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and now start to match the character's proportions as best as I can to the biker. So it's just a matter of selecting our character, grabbing the top group. We can take a look at that in our outliner so we know what we're selecting. So we're grabbing the hero group. You'll see that the pivot of this group is exactly where we want it at the origin of the scene. To clearly see this, we can go to Show and turn on Grid. So we just want to make sure that the character rests on the grid and is matched to the proportions of our biker as best we can. We do not want to affect the scale of this character in one axis, but in all axes to make sure her proportions do not change. All right, so let's say we get started. We'll go to component mode and we'll grab all of our points on this mesh, and we'll go ahead and start to kind of pull her up. And moving only in the y-axis. So that means is we can now move in closer and start to use the middle mouse button and drag down. And because we've selected the y-axis, we're only moving in that direction. All right, great. So now that she rests on the grid, let's say we go back to object mode and start to scale her down, again in all axes, to kind of match the biker's proportions. So I'd say a value of 0.5 would work. You can see a few things are slightly off. For instance, the biker is a little bit shorter than she is, and the arms will have to be adjusted, things like that, but no problem. We'll get to that and take care of it shortly. Now that she's scaled down, let's go back to component mode, grab all of her points, and move her forward. Again, to match the biker as best as we can. Let's go back to the Show menu, make sure Joints is checked on. And then we'll go to Shading and turn on X-Ray Joints. What I'll do from here is go to Wireframe mode and use that to assist me in making sure the new character is matched in the new skeleton, this imported skeleton, as best as we possibly can have her fit. Okay, so I'd say that looks pretty good. If we need to make any modifications after the fact, we most certainly can. All right, great. Well, That looks pretty good. So at this point, once she's matched, we can now safely take the biker and remove him. No longer need that asset. What we'll also do, let's go to our Hypershade. What we'll also do is make sure to remove any unused nodes. So I'll go to the first tab here so we can see our textures. We have some textures that belong to the biker. So what I'll do is just simply go to Edit and choose Delete Unused Nodes to clean things up. All right, much better. Okay, so at this point, what I'd like to do is take the character and have her stored underneath our rig structure, our grouping structure. If you'd like to learn more about how to build this, again, feel free to look into our rigging game characters course. It's great to stay organized and also have a structure that will help the control rig to be functional, and that's what we have built. Taking a look at the outliner, you can see that things are very organized, and it's for a reason. Not only to access certain nodes we may need to grab, but also, again, to make sure that globally scaling our character is going to work with no errors. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to now take the hero node and have that stored underneath the biker model node. So simply parent to the model node. Now at this point, we can use the script that I mentioned to you earlier to remove any namespaces. So these namespaces are the characters before the actual name of the object in our scene. So you can see that it is identified by the name of, let's say, the file we import, followed by a colon to separate that name with our object name. So to remove it, let me go ahead and show you what our code is going to do. Let's go to our script editor, and I'll just clear everything out and choose File, Load Script. I'll go to the project directory. Notice I have it set. So simply choose the scripts folder. So here are all of the scripts we'll work with. And we'll choose the Remove Namespaces script. So we'll choose Open. And let's go ahead and take a look at what this does. So I'll go ahead and zoom in. So the first thing we do is find all objects in our scene with the command ls, and that is stored in the objs variable. We've made it an array, so we can grab more than one object. So we can grab all objects. Next, we do a for loop that says for all objects in our variable, which grabs all objects in our scene. So this is to be applied to all objects, and here is our for loop variable, all objs. So for all objects, what the code is then going to do is tokenize those selected objects. So what tokenize does is it splits up those objects according to what we define. And in this case, the semicolon is what splits the objects we define in our tokenize command. All of those objects are going to be stored in this variable that has been declared before the tokenize command. At the very top, what we see is a split variable. And again, what that basically does for us is it allows us to have a variable to store the tokenize result into. So the last thing the code does is it takes that result, the tokenize, and it subtracts the first part of our namespace. So here's the variable that stores our namespace, and then it looks for the size of that and subtracts 1 to remove the namespace from all objects. So the last thing we do is we rename all objects to our variable that removes the namespace. And what this catch function does is it looks for any errors that we may run into, and it allows us to avoid having those errors cause any problems with our code. So we may run into very minor errors, but what catch is going to do is still have our code function while nullifying those errors. So let's go ahead and run this. We'll press Control A and we'll press Control Enter. Notice we have, again, a very minor error that says no object matches name, no problem. Because, if you'll take a look, no longer do we have the namespaces. Okay, great. So our scene is a lot cleaner now. I like to remove namespaces because it's a lot easier to, let's say, build the functionality in the control rig we will work on without having to worry about extra characters that just take more effort to kind of code in or build expressions for. All right, so now that that has been done, what we'll do is just a little bit of cleanup work. So for instance, on our game character layer, let's go ahead and rename that to the character we're working with. So that's simply going to be hero as our prefix. We'll choose save. Selecting our hero's mesh, we'll hit the up arrow to grab its group and have that stored in this layer. We'll go to our top character node, biker, and rename that to hero. And if you'll notice, going to the character menu, we also have character sets. So let's go ahead and rename our top character set node. That's the only one we need to be concerned with. So instead of biker, that's simply going to be hero. All right, this would be a good time to stop the lesson. In the next lesson, we will start to have this control rig fit to match our character's proportions so that it can actually be usable.